Hey guys, welcome to another episode of The Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick.
I'm Ian.
Today we're reviewing the classic album Green by R.E.M. There's a bunch of links down below. Make sure you check them out. There's links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlist we put together a week, and the Patreon page. Make sure you go check all that out. Of course, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give us a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time we release new episodes. So Green was released November 7th, 1988. I think it was their sixth studio album.
Mm-hmm.
Fallout 2 Document, which came out in 87. This is back in the day when bands would release an album like every single year.
Right.
Green was always a different album for me when I looked at it because, like, comparing it to the albums that came out before it, musically it was different. Mm-hmm. I know that R.E.M. left. They were with IRS Records before, from Document and before. And the band didn't like the way that IRS Records promoted Document. So there was a rift there. They ended up leaving. They went to Warner Brothers, and that's where they recorded Green. So, and the reason they went with Warner Brothers is because Warner Brothers gave them this musical freedom.
Which is odd, thinking about it.
Yeah.
Because IRS was a slightly more independent label.
But there were other labels that offered them more money than what Warner Brothers offered them. But it was that creative freedom that they wanted to have. And I think it really kind of came through on Green because Green was musically different than what the band did before. It was definitely more experimental. And what were you going to say?
I was going to say, I feel like in some cases that works to its detriment, not in quality because it's a great album, but when you think of R.E.M., I'm speaking for myself here, I always thought of Document and then Out of Time. Green always seemed to get lost in the mix to me.
Yeah.
And re-listening to it again for this review, I'm almost like angry at myself for that because I think it's a better album at least than Document.
Yeah.
I would have said something completely different 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing with Green was it was so experimental for the band. Mm. And where I think the experimenting worked in a lot of different ways. It didn't work in some ways on the album. But I see Green as an album that allowed them to create Out of Time, that allowed them to create Automatic for the People,
right,
to create Monster, which were all great albums that came out after this. Green was like the beginning of this really commercially successly period for the band.
It kind of started with Document. I mean, they had some hits off of Document, but I even after that, knowing that I was falling short with this album, I would say it's more Document to Monster, not Green to Monster. But I definitely agree with your, the transition that they're making. This is a transitional album in my opinion.
And I think a lot of that comes down to production also. Scott Litt produced Document, and he produced every R.E.M. album from Document until, I think, New Adventures in Hi-Fi. Okay. So that whole series of R.E.M.'s albums were all produced by Scott Litt, and they were the most successful albums of the band's career. Right. So when the band went into the studio to record Green, I don't think they wanted to have this musically unified album. I think they intended it to be more eclectic, to show some differing influence. And I think that's kind of what makes the album good and what also is kind of a negative on the album for me, because where I think that eclecticness really kind of works in a bunch of ways, it also kind of gives the album at times this almost like haphazard
or jarring
disjointed kind of listen.
Yeah.
And like I said, I think that's kind of what I knocked the album down a little bit before. But outside of that, I mean, it's a really solid album.
Yeah, I don't know if I feel that way about that. I can definitely understand I
think that they were to take those songs,
there's a jarring effect on some. We're going from one song to another. Just I think they're organized right.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is I wonder if they were if they rearranged the track listing, maybe having a different having more consistent flow on the album maybe would help it a little bit more.
I don't know. I mean, maybe. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with the lineup of songs, because like you said, I almost feel like that's how intentional. That, and I like that. When I was listening to it the other day, it was interesting how there was a difference between tone and mood in the songs.
Yeah, it's definitely across the album. There's definitely a different feel from song to song.
And to me, it made the album I don't know. It was an enjoyable listen. And then I went through and listened to it again, and it continued, even though I was expecting these things that I was listening for a little bit more intently than I had in the past.
And I don't know if other people out there feel the same way as I do. I think the one thing that hurt the album for a long time for me is the song Stand. It was like the huge song. It was on MTV every single day. It seemed like hourly they were playing that song. And I got tired of hearing it.
It still pops up on classic rock radio all the time.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think that, like, listening to, because obviously I've listened to those R.E.M. albums for years, but I always kind of preferred Document and Out of Time over Green. I think mainly because of that song.
Maybe.
But going back and listening to it to do this review, I have a different opinion of this album than I did for years.
Absolutely. Me too. Because I always, like, I don't know if I said it on camera or not, but I feel like it always got lost between Document and Out of Time, mainly because of the singles. Stand it's a forgettable single. Yeah. You know, as I pointed out, it's stuck in my head.
It's a huge song.
Yeah, it's a catchy song.
Orange Crush was another big single.
One that
Pop Song 89 was another huge single off the album. There were, I think, the 4 singles they released, I think, were probably the best songs off of the album. There's only one song for sure I can do without. But, I don't know. I think the songs they picked for the singles, I think were the correct choices.
Well, they were good songs. Orange Crush, I like, is the best out of all the singles.
Yes.
Maybe Pop Song 89, but it just, Green just always seemed to get lost in the middle. Yeah. Like, it was just...
It was there, but it wasn't...
to Out of Time. I mean, as it stands right now, I don't even have a vinyl copy of Green, but I have a vinyl copy of Document and Out of Time.
Yeah.
So it just, in my mind, I'm like, well, I need that one and I need that one. It never really, for some reason, just never really clicked with me until recently. And I had listened to it many, many times before, just never as intently as I did this time.
I guess the only other negative I can have for this album is, and I don't want to sound like I'm bashing on this album because I really do enjoy this album. I think the other thing that I've got an issue with is, like, listening to this album compared to some other albums from like 88, 89. Is this, I don't know, it almost feels a little more dated musically than some of the other albums from around that time
period.
Could
that just be because of how much some of those songs were played on MTV?
That's possible.
Because you can, I feel that way with certain, well, like Beastie Boys, License to Ill. You gotta fight for your right to party. That song, I can only think of that song in terms of 1986, 87. I can't, even though there's nothing about it that's necessarily 80s.
That's true.
But I cannot get it's completely indicative of the 80s to me.
Yeah.
And I think it has to do with the fact that it's overplayed.
That's possible.
And I think Stand specifically, when you hear that song, you're drawn right back to that era. So that kind of anchors it in the 80s, but I don't feel that the rest of the album is dated in any way.
Okay. Alrighty, and so on a scale of 1 to 10, what score would you give this album?
I feel like it'd be probably an 8.5.
Yeah. I gave it a 7.5 out of 10. I think it's really good. Like I said, I do have some issues because of how it seems a little disjointed at times, but it's still,
and like I said,
really
I kind of find that as a positive more than a negative.
Yeah. So. Well, that's all we got for today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop us a comment down below. Let us know what you guys think of Green. What score on a scale of 1 to 10 would you give it? I guess that's kind of my other thing. Kind of go back to my score real quick before we wrap up the episode. Is I also kind of compare it, even though you're kind of comparing apples to oranges. I think I'll always compare it to those series of albums. Document, Out of Time, Automatic for the People.
Right. Well, Automatic for the People is it's in my top 25 albums of all time, just in general. So if I do that, if I compare it to that, it would not be fair to Green for me to do that.
But let us know what you guys think. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure to see a little thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. That's all we got. Until next time.
Talk to y'all later.
Keep all spinning. Peace.